Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Andersen, author of lovefraud.com and host of the True Love Fraud Stories podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Kate Munden, an integrative psychologist from the UK, about how to recover from the emotional abuse of a narcissistic or sociopathic mother. Our most recent episode was entitled, I Could Have Been My Mother's Third Victim. In it, a woman whom we called Charlotte tells her story of growing up with a mother who cared only about herself. Kate Munden says that, unfortunately, Charlotte's examples of her mother's indifference and neglect are typical of disordered parenting. Kate specializes in helping people recover from narcissistic and emotional abuse. She takes a comprehensive approach, working with the client's emotions, thoughts, and body to help them find a healthy path forward. Kate says recovery from childhood wounds is certainly possible. Here's our conversation. Kate, it's great to talk to you today. So can you please tell me about your training and your practice?
I can. Thank you for having me, Donna. I'm a trauma and embodiment specialist, and within that specialism, I support people who are in recovery from narcissistic and emotional abuse. I'm very passionate about the work, and I use a combined approach. I don't think there's just one way to feel better. And my experience has taught me that if we want to recover from this kind of abuse, we need to be coming at it from a lot of different angles. So we need to work with the thoughts, the negative thought patterns that this abuse creates, the emotional impact, which is deep and profound, but also the dysregulation of the nervous system. Narcissistic abuse is not just something you think about. It's something your whole body carries. The neglect, the silence, the rejection, as described in Charlotte's story, are not just psychological memories. They shape how the nervous system develops and how we regulate our emotions and how we then relate to others in adulthood. So a child raised in this atmosphere learns to monitor every micro shift, everything that others are doing. They learn to be performers and to feel that their needs are perhaps dangerous or shameful, and this wires deeply into the body. It's not just about thought. So I place a lot of focus on helping people regulate their nervous system as well as their thought patterns, because that chronic abuse, that long-term abuse, that family of origin abuse creates generally hypervigilance and or collapse of freeze state, the shame state. And that, until that is unraveled, the client is it's going to be difficult for the client to change those thought patterns and process those emotions.
You gave a good overview there, and I think I'd like to ask some specific questions about some of the things that you talked about. So, can you tell me then, you help the targets of narcissistic abuse. Can you define what narcissistic abuse is?
So to me, my definition, I'm sure there's plenty of definitions that others have out there, but to me, it has a very specific flavour. It's patterned abuse, and it's often very deniable, and it's psychological, and it is designed to control and to destabilize another person. It's not ordinary conflict where you are met in an arena that feels ordinary, that feels normal. It's about eroding the self-trust and the identity of the target. That's how I sum it up.
Well, that brings an interesting question to mind. Do you think that is the intention of the abuser to actually erode the person that they're abusing?
I think it's clear to me from the clients that I work with that in many, many cases, yes, that is the intention. It's to destabilize and control. So whether it's a romantic relationship or whether it's a family relationship or whether it's a friendship or a work, more increasingly so, I'm seeing it happen in workplace as well, with a boss perhaps doing that to an employee as well. It is about eroding that person and destabilizing them so that they just can't function anymore. And I think often there is intent there, sadly. I mean, we can't step around inside someone's brain ourselves, but it seems clear to me that that is often the intent.
In our most recent episode, which you referred to briefly, we have a survivor who we called Charlotte, and she described her upbringing by a cold, uncaring mother. So, can disordered parents engage in narcissistic abuse towards their children?
I think so. Charlotte's story was hugely moving. Sadly, not alien to me. I've heard very, very similar stories from a lot of my clients. And it's a very clear example. I think a parent who hides in her room all day, leaving her child alone and unacknowledged as Charlotte began the story, but who is very charming in public, is engaged in this kind of abuse. And the fact that Charlotte also saw the charming side of her mother and saw that out in public, incredibly destabilizing. And her mother's needs and image came first. The child becomes invisible at home and useful only as an accessory to her mother's persona. The injury here is betrayal. There's no safe base for Charlotte when it was just her and her mother. And you grow up then never knowing which parent they'll get. That intermittent reinforcement pattern is there. Sometimes okay, and then suddenly this coldness, this blank look that she described quite a few times through the recording. She would ask her mother for some kind of validation, some kind of support, and was just met with dead eyes. Incredibly destabilizing, and really, really challenging because the front persona was so completely different.
Mm. So, what are some of the ways that disordered mothers emotionally or psychologically abuse their children?
I'll start with intermittent reinforcement. So, the classic example of this in Charlotte's story was the story of when her mother got her the job when she'd come home from college and she was late and her phone had run out of battery. When she finally got home, her mother was screaming at her, "Where have you been? Where have you gone?" In a absolutely rageful fit. So she came home to the shock of this rageful parent, to the point that Charlotte left, actually just walked out of the house and stayed with friends because she was so frightened. The next day, when she comes in, Mum is sweetness and light, as if nothing had happened. "Hi, honey. Oh, did you have a good time?" Completely gaslighting her. So the gaslighting is one of the techniques, but also that not knowing of who you're going to meet, that hot and cold, intermittent reinforcement that then hooks the target in to forever trying to get back to the warm, kind person, because that's where safety is. And if that's your family of origin, if that's your mother, then you're constantly hooked into that pattern. So that's the first pattern that I would outline, beautifully described by Charlotte, but it is there in all narcissistic abuse that certainly I have come up against with my clients. There's the weaponized silence and neglect that her mother used, disappearing to her bedroom for hours and hours. The devaluing of achievements, to ignoring or dismissing accomplishments or taking the accomplishments as their own. again beautifully described by Charlotte, where she was given this award, and her mother's response was everyone was looking at me and congratulating me about Charlotte's award. So there's that, the devaluing of her achievements, the charm in public, the cruelty in private, body shaming. Well, that was a very key part of Charlotte's story as well. Very, very common. Eating disorders, again, very, very common. Work with a lot of clients who've experienced that. And the sabotaging of milestones, her wedding day. So many times the targets that I have worked with have experienced something very similar to this, where their key event, their special day, is sabotaged in some way, but done very subtly. So the sabotage was the sabotage actually directly of her father. So her father is absolutely devastated on the day, but it wasn't something directly at Charlotte, but it flavoured her whole day with sadness because her father was so devastated. And she ended up picking up her father and picking him up emotionally on her special day when it should have all been about her. And then the further sabotage of her mother inviting in the guests from the other party and making it all about her. These kinds of patterns I see repeated over and over and over again. And the flatness of the response to deeply tragic events like the loss of her brother, the awful loss of her brother and her father. These I see again and again as well. This is not a normal response to these awful tragic events.
So, how does this type of emotional or psychological abuse from a narcissistic mother affect the children's personality development?
Oh, yes, it has a profound impact. What I see probably most of all is a deep suppression of authenticity, because at home it is not okay to authentically be you. If you're ignored or criticised or mocked, maybe you're the family scapegoat, maybe the one that's everyone makes the jokes about. You learn to dim yourself. It's not safe to be me. You learn to bury your feelings, and over time, targets develop chronic shame. So just to delineate the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad. That deep collapse, that deep inner collapse of there's something deeply wrong with me. I don't accept myself. I am unacceptable. And this, when we carry that inner programming of deep shame, that deep inner collapse, we then have survival strategies to work around that. So that might show up as, for example, perfectionism. So everything I do has to be perfect. So you're pushing yourself into a pattern of high overachieving and perfectionism. You might be hypervigilant the whole time, or you might feel that you have to be invisible and actually making connections with other people, that living a deeply lonely life is the only way to survive.
Mm. So, have you seen cases where the children of narcissistic mothers are traumatized by their upbringing? And if so, how does that affect the children?
Huge, I mean, hugely. So if we look at Charlotte, when she finally sought medical help, she was diagnosed as having complex PTSD. I would say most of the adult survivors of this kind of abuse that I work with, are also in that position. And when it's not just one event, so trauma is an emotive word. But we can have one event traumas like a car crash, for example. But complex trauma is when it's a long pattern of, might be microaggressions, microabuse, all that Charlotte described, and a pattern of being unseen, unheard, undermined, that then creates a cumulative effect in the system. So often clients will, if we think of it like a bell curve, we go up the bell curve. At the bottom of the bell curve, everything's good. We feel well. Our nervous system is regulated. We start to creep up the bell curve. We might start to feel a little bit anxious, a little bit unhappy, a little bit angry maybe. And then we go into fight and flight. So if you're living in a hypervigilant mode, you're quite high up the bell curve a lot of the time. And then when life becomes too much, where everything is too much, that's when we start to check out and disappear. And people with complex trauma will toggle between checking out and disappearing and feeling really anxious. So they start to come down the bell curve and they meet all that anxiety they got away from by disconnecting. And they tend to stay in this state of toggling between the two, which is why it is so important to help the client to regulate their nervous system at the same time. So that if you're working on the therapy of healing from this, if you're in that state of constantly checking out or being hypervigilant, your brain's not functioning properly. Your body is flooded with cortisol, adrenaline, and also the hormones that push us into dissociation as well, which is like the body's heroin, where it feels dreamy and we're disconnected and we're not really feeling. So when the body's flooded with all those chemicals, we can't think clearly. And we need to come down the bell curve again.
How do you help clients who have been brought up by a disordered mother?
It's a process. The first step that I always take with any client is naming the reality and validating their experience. Yes, that is abuse. No, it's not okay. And even though other people might not have seen it, it was your lived experience. And that validation is often the first time they've been seen, often the first time they've been understood. And often I would say the freeze response, that sense of being locked into immobility and freeze, is probably what I come up against the most. Freeze/dissociation, where feelings just isn't safe. Helping the client unlock that freeze very gently and very slowly so that they can start to feel again and soften the shame and soften the crash phase. So in Charlotte's story, when she finally went no contact and finally her nervous system stopped being poked relentlessly by her mother, when she finally had the peace of no contact, her system crashed, which is very common. A lot of my clients have chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. That's really, really common as well. When that crash phase happens, it's really allowing the rest, honoring the rest, and really pacing recovery, pacing and meeting the fatigue and with compassion rather than pressure. It's a slow journey to rebuild, but I would truly offer it is entirely possible to rebuild. Teaching small, safe acts of authenticity, learning to set small boundaries and realizing that the world won't end if you do, and celebrating the small wins and celebrating feeling again. And that's okay to feel, because it won't have felt okay to feel most likely before.
So how have you seen the phenomenon of being raised by a disordered parent affect a client's relationship choices as an adult?
Often the tragedy plays out in romantic relationships. So often it will play out where the client gets into relationship with a disordered person because that's what they know. That's what they know as love. And that doesn't mean that they're mad or they're bad or they're broken. It just means that's what they know. So they will confuse that. They will confuse the intensity of love bombing with love. And they may be, drawn to those kinds of partners who feel familiar. They might be critical. They might be absent. They might be unreliable. And that confusion of intensity or chaos instead of love is pretty logical when you think about it. If that's what you've been brought up with, that's what you know, that's what you're going to be drawn to. So healing is about calibrating safety so it doesn't feel boring and it starts to feel nourishing. And that's a journey.
So, what beliefs do the adult children of disordered mothers need to change?
Oh, so many. Sadly, I'm bad. I'm not good enough. The shame belief. There's something wrong with me. A really big one, I'm too sensitive, because a lot of the gaslighting will often have been, you're so sensitive, when actually something really cruel and awful has happened. And real core things like I don't matter. Love will always be conditional. And these might be deeply unconscious as well. They might not be at the surface to begin with. This might be something that really unravels over time, that the client suddenly realizes, this is how I feel. My achievements mean nothing, are meaningless. And a big one is about joy, that joy is not okay. If I show joy, I will be damaged or attacked, or it will be taken away from me. And we need to help the client to find the deeper, more embodied truths of I matter, my joy counts, my body is perfect, I deserve relationships that celebrate me. And again, it's a journey, but it is entirely possible to stand tall and find dignity again, because I think our dignity is eroded by these kinds of relationships.
Mm. So, how can people work with their bodies to release the childhood trauma of these experiences?
So, there are a lot of fantastic body-based tools out there. Simply, movement is medicine, I would offer. Any kind of exercise and movement is bringing us out of a place of stuckness. So anything that offers that works for the client, I would always celebrate. The two things that I offer in my practice that I'm really passionate about, I see deeply change lives, are the first, purely working with the body, is the trauma release work that I do. So I am one of the 5 trainers in the UK to train TRE, tension and trauma release exercises. So bit of word salad, TRE. But this, in really simple terms, without story or without narrative, starts to unravel a nervous system that has been disordered for a long time. We're teaching the body to, as Dr. Stephen Porges calls it, access our onboard toolkit for self-healing. And when we have experienced trauma, when our body has been in that brace, often that deep freeze or intense hypervigilance for such a long time, if this is family of origin trauma, the body doesn't stop making cortisol. We keep making it. So there's no end point. We just keep making more and more and more and more. And the body starts to break down around it, and it starts to create deep tension patterns around it. And what we do in the TRE space is teach the body to connect with our deep neurogenic tremor mechanism. Now, the tremor mechanism is there within all of us. You might have tremored at some point in your life, Donna. I know I did when I went into labour with my son. It's the body's natural ability to discharge cortisol. But in society, we tend to demonize shaking and tremoring as a sign of illness, a sign of weakness, a sign that there's something deeply wrong, and in some cultures, demonic possession, that kind of thing. When actually that tremor mechanism is your body's natural ability to bring us back into a state of regulation again and naturally discharge cortisol. So you might, for example, have seen dogs shaking. Dogs will shake when they're frightened. We as humans have exactly that same mechanism within us, and if we can come into relationship with the tremor in a really regulated, gentle, slow, safe way, like just easing a little bit as we if we had a fizzed up Coke bottle, we wouldn't rip the top off really quickly. We'd slowly unwind the fizz so that it's not a big sticky mess. We do the same with a shaking body. And the beautiful thing about TRE, which is why I'm so passionate about it, is that once the client has learned it for themselves and they've learned how to access their tremor safely and in a connected way with a certified provider, they then got it as a tool for them for life. And then they can use it to naturally unwind their bodies over time. And people who have been the target of this type of abuse feel disempowered, feel powerless, feel that there's something terribly wrong with them. And when they learn techniques like this, suddenly they're getting their power back because it's you healing you. And there's something deeply wonderful about that. And I see that openness return to people. I see them find joy again and find connection again when they have a regular TRE practice. It can be truly life-changing.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, do you recommend that your clients go no contact with disordered parents?
It's a difficult one. No contact often is the only way to feel safe. It is entirely the client's choice whether they do that. It's not always easy if it's family of origin. It can be really difficult. There might be intense pressure to maintain contact. And they may lose relationships with other family members if they do. So that pressure is often really strongly held. Others will choose low contact, but that can be really, really challenging and problematic. But if the client is getting seriously ill from their contact with the parents, sometimes that is the pathway for them to be well. They have to choose themselves and maybe their family, their children first. And it's a challenging choice, but honouring their safety with integrity, I would offer, is a very, very important conversation to have.
So that kind of ties into my next question. Like, how can adult children of narcissists balance protecting themselves with honoring their obligation or their felt obligation to care for their parents as they age?
Again, really, really challenging. It's fraught with guilt, with obligation, with other pressures from other members of the family. The key is boundaries. And they may have learned that it's not safe to set boundaries. It might be a really long journey for them to begin to do that. But you can care about someone without being consumed by them. You can honour what you feel is your responsibility without being consumed by them. And that might mean organising support with regard to finances or paperwork, or doing something but more from a distance, but limiting that direct emotional exposure. It's not selfish to protect yourself, it's sensible. You have to put your oxygen mask on first in order to be able to function in the world. It's essential that targets do that, and there are ways to help without becoming consumed.
Okay, so is there anything else that you'd like to add? That's the end of my questions.
I found Charlotte's story really, really moving. There was a quiet brutality to how her mum treated her. The absence, the sabotage, the cruelty in private, but the charm in public. It's so hard to put your finger on it, particularly when you're in it. It's so hard to know what's happening to you. But I would offer the collapse she experienced after going no contact. It's not weakness. It's the body's cry for rest after years of being in survival mode. When we live in survival mode, as I said earlier, body doesn't stop making cortisol. We just keep making it. And wasn't it absolutely wonderful, her skin healing? So after 2 years of no contact, her skin regenerating. I mean, I think if that shows anything that it is possible for us to regenerate, I wanted to applaud when I heard that on the story. So if anybody's listening and this is your story, you're not invisible. You're really not invisible. You are not unworthy. And step by step, you can come home to yourself and find well-being again.
Great. Well, Kate, this has been a lovely interview. I thank you so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much, Donna. I've really enjoyed it.
I'm Donna Andersen, and this is True Love Fraud Stories. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Kate Munden. For information about her practice, please visit katemunden.com. You can arrange to speak to her in the UK or online, and she also offers free resources on her website. You'll find a link on the page about this interview on podcasts.lovefraud.com. True Love Fraud Stories is produced by lovefraud.com. Engineering is by Terry Kelly. To learn how to recognize and recover from everyday sociopaths, visit lovefraud.com. You'll find articles, books, and webinars. For practical advice on dealing with your situation, reach out to me. I also offer EFT tapping and Reiki so you can put down the emotional burden, feel better, and move forward. Book your session today at lovefraud.com/talk to Donna. Also, I invite you to my Love Fraud Live YouTube show. I talk about how to spot, escape, and recover from sociopaths, and then I answer your questions. It streams live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I look forward to seeing you there.